Today I'm going to share with you how I build my arrows so that way I know that they are the best that they can be. There's a lot of different ways to build arrows, and you can take as much time as you want to build the arrows, weighing all of the components and then matching the lightest with the heaviest so you can end up with the closest weight of arrows as possible. So I'm going to go through the steps of how I build my arrows, and hopefully this will help you build your own arrows and figure out how to build the best arrows that you can build. So if you haven't already, I have a couple of videos showing like how I select my length and then also the spine of arrow to use. So go back and check those videos out if you haven't. This is going to be kind of the final series of picking the arrow and then also building it and tuning it. So I have it cut already. These are Easton Axis match grade. They're really good arrows. I only had two that were .002 straightness. I'm going to show you how I figure out how straight they are. So I like to use the Last Chance Archery Revolution Arrow Tuner. And I check the straightness of my arrow. And this will tell me which end to cut off. So if one end is really wobbly, I will end up cutting that end off. With this batch, I only had two arrows that were within .002 straightness. So for me, that's good enough. I didn't really worry about it too much, and both ends were the same, so there was no way to cut those out. Usually you can find arrows and you can pick out a bad end and cut that end out and be left with a straighter arrow. But these arrows were all really good, and I don't think with .002 straightness that I'll probably be able to tell a difference. So they're all really straight, so after I select the straightness of them, I will move on. Once I've found the straightest side of the arrow and cut off the bad side, got them all cut, I'll take a silver Sharpie and I will mark each end, and then I will square up the shaft to make sure that each end is nice and square. So as you can see there, you can see the silver Sharpie. What I like about the arrow tuner is it's a square too, so I'll use that to square my arrows. G5 makes a really good arrow square as well. Once I have both ends squared up, I like to take a Q-tip, just kind of wipe the end just a little bit to get that dust out of there. Some of these smaller arrows are a little bit harder to get a Q-tip in, so then just kind of try to clean some of that carbon dust out of there a little bit. Alright, so now I'm ready to put a wrap on my arrow. If you don't use wraps, you don't have to worry about this step. I just like to use a wrap because it shows me a little bit of the blood and a little bit more white so I can see my arrow. So now I'm done with the arrow tuner. I've cleaned up the shaft. I like to just take one of these AE Max Clean wipes, wipe the end of the arrow before I put the wrap on. Make sure that that's dry. If you have a mat, like a mouse pad or one of these Last Chance Archery's mats, it makes putting these wraps on a lot easier. What I like to do is, just so my arrows are made the same, I like to put them on a straight line and then mark the side, so in that way I start the wrap the same and I can get my arrows for the wrap to end up the same on all the arrows. I like to use 4 fletching, but if you did use a 3 fletch, you can figure out the stiffest spine of the arrow, but with 4 fletch, I find that I can usually just knock tune it to get it to shoot really well and group with the others. So I wiped the end of the arrow. Now I'm going to take one of these. You can make your own, but I just use the boning wraps. Alright, so I have my wrap here. I'm going to lay it down onto the mat. I like to try to line it up with the line so that way I can make sure that my arrow shaft is going straight onto the wrap. Okay, so I've got my arrow here. Make sure I'm lined up with the end of the shaft and going on square to the wrap. And I just apply even pressure, roll it through. And I like to push down on the seam as I'm rolling it, and then as I roll it all the way, I like to make sure that seam's pressed in there good. So now I have that installed, and I will fletch my arrow now. Once I get the wrap on, I'm ready to fletch the arrows. With these, I'm going to do a 4 fletch using the AirRazor Pros. They only weigh 4.3 grains each. So they're really lightweight vane and really small. So with a small profile vane, I usually go with a 4 fletch. And then I'll also try the AirRazors, the 26s, in a 3 fletch. And I'll see which one I like better. For this video, I'm just going to do the 4 fletch in this, because that's what my jig's set up for. So this is where it comes into play if you really wanted to. You can weigh all of these. So if you just have like a little arrow scale, you can weigh all of these components. So if you weigh each vane, so that one's actually only 4 grains. That one's a 4.2. 4. So yeah, all these are 4, but one is 4.2. So you can weigh all of them like that, and then also what you'll do too is you'll weigh the components. So 54.9, 54.8. For me, I'm not that good of an archer, so a couple, like a grain difference in an arrow, I'm probably not going to be able to outshoot that difference. If you're a really good shot, you might, if you're a lot better shot than me, you might be able to tell the difference, but for me, I'm not a pro archer, so it doesn't really matter. And this is where it can take a lot of time to build an arrow, is weighing each individual component, matching them up with the lightest arrow of the batch, and making sure the heavy gets put on the lightest, and then the lightest gets put on the heaviest arrow. So that way you can try to match group all of your arrows. I've already built a couple of these arrows, and I know that they are within about half a grain of each other. So for me, I'm definitely not going to see the difference in that, but if you are a pro archer, you might want to take the time to do that. For me, like I said, for the stiffest part of the arrow and all of that, I'll knock tune it out most of the time. Especially with the 4 fletch, you got that extra spot so you can rotate it, and usually get it to tune with the rest of the arrows doing it that way. But if you are somebody who's really going to be particular, you can check the spine of the arrow and find that stiffest spot of the arrow and make sure you fletch them all the same that way. So if that's something that you want to do, it's definitely going to make a little bit of a difference. But for an average archer like me, I just like to build a straight arrow that I know is straight, and then also use good components and try to build them the best that I can build them without taking a ton of time. So I got this arrow wrapped, ready to go. I'm going to put a nock in and then fletch it. So put the nock in so that way I can fletch this, and what I like to do is just make sure that the lines on these nocks go into the wrap the same way, so that way I can try to make sure that a vane ends up where the wrap overlaps. And the easiest way to do that is to put it in a fletching jig, and then test fit the fletching. Zoom in here so you can see this. Alright, so with any fletching jig, you're going to want to make sure that you put the vane in the same spot every time. So like on the VaneMaster Pro, I've got a little black mark, and I make sure the back of the fletching goes to it. One thing you want to think about with your fletching is make sure that it's far enough away from your face onto the arrow that your fletching is not going to touch your face. So for me, I'm about 1 1/8 inches roughly is usually where I fletch my arrows from the back. But it's something to take into account, so that way the fletching is not going to hit your face when you're drawing back. So make sure you put it on the same spot in the jig so it ends up the same spot. And then the little crease of the wrap is here, and it's exactly where the fletching is going to cover it. And with these, luckily, you do not have to use a primer pin. It does take a little bit of a setup. So when I'm pushing in, I want to make sure that the vane is touching equally, which I already had this set up, but I can adjust this to make sure the vane is setting perfect onto the arrow shaft. So when I adhere it, it's getting good adhesion and will stick. So for me, I like to use the Max Bond glue, and I will go ahead and glue this up and get this arrow built. So I will slide it on for about 15 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And hopefully you can see that crease in there of the wrap, and you can see that the vane is right on that, so I know my wrap is not going to come unwrapped. And then I'll just take a Q-tip, wipe off whatever excess glue. And if you really want to make sure your arrows are going to hold well, you can put just a little dab of glue on the front. And another one on the back. And what that's going to do is if you hit your target or something like that, it'll just make sure that your fletching does not rip off. Okay, and with any fletching jig, make sure that you're locked into the next space. If you were using vanes that needed to be primed, you would have to use a primer pin for that, but luckily these do not need that. Really excited to try these vanes, especially since they are really light and small, but they're also stiff. They're supposed to be pretty quiet. I have not tested them myself, so really looking forward to getting them out and shooting and seeing if they will steer a mechanical broadhead enough. I'm sure with field points they'll do just fine, but I am not sure how well they will do with a mechanical broadhead. So like I said, I will be testing these with the AirRazor 26s just to see which one I like the grouping of better. All right. So some people really enjoy fletching arrows and others do not really like it at all. The nice part is there's companies now that will fletch arrows for you and do all of the work of checking the spine, straightness, and everything for you and fletching them. All right. So since that one had glue at the front and back already, I'm not going to worry about putting glue on there. And now it is fletched up and ready to go. I personally run a 2 degree. So on the Last Chance Archery, I put mine on 2 to the left. That's just the way my arrows clock. So then I just fletch them to the left at 2 degrees. And that seems to work pretty well for me. Alright, so I got it all fletched up. Now I will show you gluing in the insert. So Easton sends you this little deburring tool, and it's going to just help burr out the end of the arrow so your insert goes in all the way. So I would usually use hot melt, but with these being aluminum and then also the O-ring, they say not to use hot melt on these ones. So I'm just using the Easton Quick Bond glue. So I'll just make sure that I got a good ring of glue around there. And I make sure that I press and hold so that way it stays in all the way. And you can definitely feel the glue harden up. So there you have it. The insert is inserted. Good to go. And we are all 4 fletched up and ready to shoot it. So now I will take one of the ones I've already built and shoot it through paper and show you tuning it. Alright, so I have my arrow made up. I'm going to go ahead and shoot it through paper and see how it's tuning with my bow. I have a little knock right and knock low tear. So I'll go ahead and show you tuning the bow to get that to work with this bow. Okay, so straight up tear. Alright, so the bow ended up being out of time. The bottom is hitting a little bit before the top. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to adjust that. As you can see in some of the last shots there going through the paper, I finally got everything to tune out perfect and shooting bullet holes. So now I actually need to go in the field and shoot it and see how the arrows are flying. But for right now, I've got it paper tuned, so these arrows are set up with this bow. This is the Mathews Lift 29.5. One thing that you'll see is I had a tail right tear, and with these bows, if it's just a little bit of a tear, the top hats, it's really hard to micro adjust, because basically if you switch the top hats, you're going to go from a one-way tear to the other way. So I went from a tear right to the tail left tear on it. So it took a little bit to get everything set up here. I ended up actually swapping out the grip on the bow. So now I have a total peep grip on it. I just found myself to be torquing that a little bit less. It's a little bit wider here and flat, and it just seemed to fit my hand better. So by switching that out, I got it to have this rest at 0. So it's still right at the center shot, which it should be. And I didn't have to adjust anything there. These arrows are now flying great out of this bow, and I am ready to go out in the field and test it. One thing I will say too, with these arrows, hopefully you can see it here, but I put a little mark here on it, and what that does is it gives me a starting point. So if I have to knock tune the arrow, so this one ended up being good, but on this other one here, you can see the mark is actually up on top of the arrow now. So as with the 4-fletch, I was able to basically move it 4 different times and figure out which one's shooting the best. So that's the one reason why I do kind of like 4-fletch, is it gives you that option just to knock tune. If you actually want to spine test all the arrows, that's a really accurate way to do it. This way is just I can just fletch them and get it done, and then just knock tune it. So I finally got these arrows to work. I'm going to get them out in the field and test it. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video on these arrow builds. So I'll be testing a little bit more with this bow, and like I said, the 3-fletch versus 4-fletch. So hopefully you'll subscribe to my channel if this helped you at all. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and especially if you stuck around to the end of this. As always, stay hidden.